It was the winter of 1980, the night Austin went silent under a sheet of ice. Trains stopped. Power failed. And at a forgotten corner of the city's old rail station, a young black woman sat trembling on a metal bench, her breath forming ghosts in the cold air. She had no coat thick enough for that night, no home waiting, and no reason to believe tomorrow would be any different. But then a limousine's headlights cut through the storm. And the man who stepped out, a billionaire known for steel, oil, and silence, was about to make a choice that would rewrite both their lives. Before we roll back time, tell us where you're watching from, and hit subscribe for more true stories of ordinary hearts that changed history. January 8, 1980. The temperature in Austin had plunged to record lows. Icy rain turned the streets into glass, and the city's old Union Station looked like something out of a dream, empty, echoing, and lit only by the flicker of fluorescent bulbs. Elizabeth Harris, 26, sat wrapped in a faded scarf that once belonged to her mother. She had lost her housekeeping job that morning when the hotel where she worked closed without warning. 2 weeks of unpaid wages, one small suitcase, and an empty wallet, that was all she had left. She rubbed her hands together, whispering prayers to keep her courage from freezing. The last bus to her cousin's house had stopped running hours ago. So she waited, hoping the storm would break. Then came the sound of tires crunching over ice. A long, black limousine slid to a stop near the platform. From it stepped Elton George, 41 years old, founder of the George Group, billionaire industrialist, and one of the most powerful men in Texas. He'd been grounded by the weather. His private jet couldn't take off. So he came to the station looking for the overnight rail north. That's when he saw her. A small figure hunched on the bench, shaking so hard her suitcase rattled. For a moment he simply watched, uncertain why he couldn't look away. Then he crossed the platform, snow whipping at his face. "Miss," he called, voice deep, controlled. "You shouldn't be out here. It's below freezing." Elizabeth looked up, startled. "Train's delayed," she said quietly. "I'll be all right." He saw the lie before she finished the sentence. Her lips were blue, her gloves thin cotton. He shrugged off his overcoat and draped it over her shoulders. "Please," she whispered. "I can't take that." "You can," he said. "And you will. Come inside before you lose a hand to frostbite." When she tried to stand, her knees buckled. Without a word, he caught her, careful, steady, and guided her into the station's waiting room, the coat heavy on her small frame. For a man used to commanding thousands, the act felt strangely personal. The only open building nearby was the historic Driscoll Hotel, its chandeliers dimmed to half-light to save power. The staff stared as Elton entered carrying a young black woman in his arms. "Suite 403, he told the clerk. "And send up soup, coffee, and blankets." Elizabeth tried to protest. "Sir, please, I can't afford." He cut her off gently. "You can afford to live. That's all I'm buying tonight." When the room door closed behind them, she sat near the fire, thawing slowly while the storm clawed at the windows. Elton poured coffee and handed her a cup. "What's your name?" "Elizabeth Harris," she said, eyes down. I clean rooms." Or did. He listened as she spoke of the hotel closure, the pay she never received, the way people looked through her as if she were invisible. She didn't complain. She simply stated facts, each one carrying the quiet weight of survival. "And you?" she asked finally, glancing up. "You look like you own half the city." "Only a third," he said with a small smile. "I build things. Steel, hotels, pipelines. The sort of work that leaves men rich and empty if they're not careful." She almost laughed. "Then you know something about both kinds of hunger." The words hit him harder than he expected. Most people flattered him. She, without meaning to, had seen right through him. When the coffee pot was empty and her shivering stopped, he said, "Miss Harris, you need a place to stay. I could use someone to look after my house until the staff returns from the holidays. It's honest work, and warm." Her pride bristled. "You don't owe me charity." "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But tonight, I'd like to believe the world still allows decency." She studied him, the perfect suit, the ringless hand, the fatigue in his eyes. Against every instinct of caution, she nodded. "Just for a few days," she said. He smiled. "That'll do." The ride from downtown Austin to the George estate took nearly an hour. Snow still drifted in soft sheets over the highway, and the limousine's heater hummed a steady rhythm between them. Elizabeth stared out the window, the city lights fading into darkness. "You live far," she murmured. "Far enough to think," Elton replied. "Close enough to return if I make mistakes." He wasn't sure why he said it. The mansion stood on a hill overlooking the Colorado River, lights glowing warm against the ice. Inside, the staff had left for the holidays, leaving silence and the faint scent of cedar wood polish. "Choose any guest room," he told her. "There are 11, though only 3 have heat working tonight." She smiled faintly. "One will be enough, Mr. George." "Elton," he corrected. "If you're to keep me from talking to walls, call me Elton." He showed her the kitchen, the study, the massive stone fireplace that looked built for another century. She ran her hand over the mahogany table. "I've only cleaned places like this," she said. "Never stayed in one." "Then let this be the first time you rest," he said. Over the next days, the storm kept Austin frozen. Roads closed, phone lines dropped, and the two of them lived in a kind of suspended world. Two strangers bound by weather and quiet gratitude. Elizabeth cooked simple meals, soup, cornbread, the kind of food that smelled like Sunday afternoons, and Elton found himself joining her at the kitchen table instead of the dining hall built for 20. He discovered she loved gospel records, could fix a dripping faucet, and had an opinion about nearly everything from politics to poetry. One night as the radio played soft jazz, he asked, "If the world were fair, what would you be doing?" She looked at the firelight dancing on the walls. "Maybe teaching. Maybe writing a book about people like me who keep cities running and never get names in the papers." "You should," he said. "Books don't pay rent," she replied. "I could help." She shook her head. "Then it wouldn't be my story." Her words settled over him like snow, light but impossible to ignore. When the ice finally melted, Austin woke up, and so did gossip. Neighbors saw the limousine pick up a young black woman from town each morning. Some whispered, some sneered. The city's social pages had a way of turning rumor into ink. Elton ignored it, at first. He told her, "Let them talk." But Elizabeth saw the way the board members watched her when she brought him lunch at the office. She overheard a secretary mutter charity case. That night she packed her small suitcase. "You're leaving?" he asked, finding her by the door. "I don't want to hurt your name," she said softly. "People like me don't get forgiven when they're seen with people like you." He walked closer, the lamplight catching the worry in his face. "My name means nothing if I let fear decide who deserves warmth. Stay, because you choose to, not because I ask." She hesitated, then unzipped the suitcase. "I'll stay," she said. "For the work." He smiled. "For now, that's enough." Days became weeks. She reorganized his staff, started a reading club for the workers' families on the estate, and somehow turned the sterile mansion into a home. Elton watched her from the doorway one afternoon as she laughed with the gardener's children, her scarf blowing in the wind. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside, a kind of peace money could never purchase. In March, the George Foundation hosted its annual charity gala at the Driscoll. Elton insisted Elizabeth attend, arguing that she ran half his outreach programs anyway. She wore a borrowed navy dress. He offered his arm. When they walked in together, conversation stopped. They danced once, slow, careful, the orchestra fading into applause. Flashbulbs popped near the doorway. Neither noticed until the next morning, when the Austin Chronicle headline screamed, "Billionaire George seen with mystery woman. Is love in the air?" By noon, television crews camped outside the estate. Board members called emergency meetings. A partner from Houston threatened to pull funding if he didn't resolve the distraction. Elton sat across from Elizabeth at the kitchen table, the paper between them. "They'll ruin you," she whispered. "Let them try," he said. "They've been looking for something to ruin since I stopped building oil rigs and started building schools." She reached for his hand, then stopped halfway. "I never asked for this." "I know," he said. "But you walked into my life when I needed to remember what decency looked like. I won't apologize for that." The decision that followed would shake the city and make headlines around the country. 2 mornings after the story broke, reporters crowded the marble steps of the George Group headquarters. Cameras flashed as Elton stepped out in his grey overcoat. The man who'd spent a lifetime avoiding headlines was about to write one that would never be forgotten. He looked calm, but inside his chest thundered like the storm that had brought Elizabeth into his life. She stood behind the glass doors of the lobby, watching. When the shouting died down, he began. "Good morning. I know why you're here. You've seen the pictures, you've read the gossip. So let's put truth on record." He paused, scanning the faces. "The woman in those photographs is Elizabeth Harris. She works with me, yes. She also saved me from the kind of emptiness success can't fill. I will not dismiss her. I will not apologize for kindness. And if that costs me money or reputation, so be it." A reporter shouted, "Mr. George, are you in love with her?" He didn't hesitate. "I am. And I intend to marry her." The crowd erupted, half gasps, half applause. Inside, Elizabeth pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. That evening, the story went national. Every network led with the headline, "Billionaire declares love for Maid, Austin's modern fairytale." Some mock him, others called it revolutionary. But for the first time in weeks, Elton George slept without regret. Spring came early that year. On the same hill where snow once covered the ground, rows of folding chairs faced the river. There was no orchestra, no society spectacle, just sunlight, wildflowers, and a dozen friends who believed love didn't need permission. Elizabeth wore ivory, simple and stunning. Elton waited in a dark blue suit. When she walked down the path, the entire world seemed to pause. "Do you, Elton George, take Elizabeth Harris?" "I do." "And do you, Elizabeth Harris, take Elton George?" "I do," she said, voice clear and certain. When they kissed, the crowd rose to its feet, clapping and cheering. The local paper called it Texas' most unlikely wedding. History would call it something greater. They spent their honeymoon driving through small towns across the South, visiting schools and community centers that would later bear their foundation's name. In every place they stopped, Elizabeth met people who looked at her and saw possibility. Over the next decade, the Harris George Foundation grew into one of the region's largest charities. It offered scholarships for domestic workers' children, funded nursing programs, and built literacy centers in poor neighborhoods. Elizabeth became its face and its heart. Elton, once the silent businessman, became an advocate for equity and education. At public events, they stood side by side, proof that grace could bridge any divide. Reporters loved to quote her. She once told a graduating class, "When the world leaves you in the cold, look for someone who remembers what warmth is. Then share it." That line would end up engraved on the Foundation's headquarters years later. By 2020, their love story had entered Texas legend. A new generation saw them not as scandal, but as pioneers. On their 40th anniversary, the city of Austin hosted a gala in their honor. The mayor presented them with the Lone Star Humanitarian Medal. As the crowd stood to applaud, Elton turned to his wife and whispered, "Remember the train station?" Elizabeth smiled. "I remember a man who refused to let a stranger freeze." He laughed softly. "And she's been warming my world ever since." The audience, unaware of their words, saw only 2 hands clasped tightly, proof that time hadn't dimmed what began in a blizzard. When they passed, years apart but never for long, their foundation established a small museum in downtown Austin. In one glass case sits a worn gray coat and a photograph of a young woman on a train station bench. The plaque beneath reads, In 1980, a billionaire stopped his car for a freezing stranger. He offered her warmth. She gave him purpose. Together, they built a legacy of compassion that still changes lives today. Visitors still leave notes beneath the display, some thanking them for scholarships, others simply for hope. Outside the museum, a bronze statue faces the rail tracks. It shows two figures standing side by side, looking out toward the horizon. On the base, one line of engraving glints in the Texas sun. Love found us in the cold, and never let go.